Good morning. Welcome to worship in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. How does your stomach react? How do your shoulders respond when you read or hear about climate change? About the rising warmth of our oceans, which leads to stronger storms. The rising level of acidity in those same waters, which may mean that the shells of mollusks and crustaceans will slowly dissolve, leaving millions of people very short on food. Where do you carry the tension, the worry in your body when you read about pig waste mixing with floodwaters in eastern North Carolina neighborhoods? Regardless of how we carry the anxious, muddled dread such knowledge produces, Joanna Macy writes in her work, A Wild Love for the World, you're always asked to stretch a little more. And actually, we're made for that. But in any case, she says, there's absolutely no excuse for making our passionate love for our world dependent on what we think of its degree of health, whether we think it or we are going to go on forever. This moment, you're alive. And so why not join the rebellion of people struggling to be more human in the most inhumane of conditions? Welcome, everyone, to this morning spent together. As we prepare to sing, please turn and welcome the people around you.
Every night and every morn, some to misery are born. And every morn and every night, some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to endless night. We light this chalice, symbol of our church, our faith, and our hope for a world where no one is born to endless night. Welcome to our guests. We are happy you are here today with us in this room or joining us remotely. We are pleased to have visitors with us. Our members would like to meet you personally following the service. So, if you are visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Members, take note of the guests seated near you. After the service, invite them to join you for coffee and conversation in Freeman Hall. Should it enhance your experience of future services, you can find both a large print order of service and a personal hearing assistance device on the table at the entrance to the sanctuary. There is also an elevator available. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card, place it on the offering basket later in the service. Members with a life event to share can do so on the back side of the card. The cards and offering envelopes are on the clipboards at the end of the row. Please begin passing them now. Visitors who are interested in learning about how to become a member can talk with our membership coordinator, that bright shining light standing back there in the back of the room, Kelly Green.
Kelly.
Her contact information is on the back of your order. Again, to each of you, welcome.
Our first reading is part of a poem by Craig Santos Perez. And Perez sets the poem where he lives in Manoa, Hawaii. For my pregnant wife, Nalani, during her second trimester. Nalani and I walk to our small community garden plot in Manoa. The seed packets in my pocket sound like a baby's toy rattle. When do they spray glyphosate along the sidewalks? From Cunha to Waimea, 50,000 acres of GMO fields. How will open-air pesticide drift affect our unborn daughter, whose nerve endings are just beginning to root? We plant seeds in rows. Soil gathers under our fingernails. Syngenta, DuPont, Dow, Pioneer, Monsanto, $250 million seed sector. Corn for cattle feed and syrup. Runoff turns our streams red, poisons Loai. 50,000 heart sea urchins die off. What will our daughter be able to plant in this paradise of fugitive dust?
Four pilgrims visit a sage. The world, said the sage, is a dark place where men kill for worthless real estate. Women are assaulted, children enslaved. I will pray, said the priest, to the all-loving Father for deliverance. One must be careful, said the philosopher, of hyper-real constructs promoting Hegelian absolutes of antithetical progression. I hear, said the merchant, licking his lips, there's profit in the slave trade. The poet said nothing, but covered his face and wept unconsolably, like an orphan in the night. After recovering, he spoke thus. All my life I have wielded words as a protest, a hammer to transform this world's baseness into something more benign. But alas, the world can never change. Not so, said the sage. Long ago, humans were gifted with the divine spark, what some call the Godhead. All that's best and bright in the world, kindness, compassion, love, reverence for beauty, reverence for life, were lodged in the human spirit. But humans abused this power and the gods grew angry. They decided to hide this divine spark until what day humans could become mature enough to use it properly. But where shall we hide the Godhead, they asked. that the humans will never find it. We'll put it on the top of the highest mountain, said one. Drop it at the bottom of the sea, said a second. Bury it on the dark side of the moon, said a third. No good, declared another. Those pesky humans will find it in all those places. In the end, the gods put the Godhead in the one place humans would never think to look. They placed it inside us. Your task, said the sage, is to find that spark, nourish it, bring it forth to the light of the world. From this day, said the poet, I will write no more, but will only seek the Godhead. No, said the sage, wagging her finger. You must continue to hammer the world with words of wisdom and beauty and power. Songs of protest. But you must also look within. World transformation, she said, comes equally from within as well as from without.
B.B. White puts his 8-year-old son to bed each night at 7:30, whether or not it's dark. He wants to make sure his little one can get as much sleep as possible before the sounds of explosions start up. Just like a bomb going off, the way B.B. describes it. They never sleep with their windows open, even on deliciously cool nights between summer and fall. B.B. White lives in Albany, New York, in the Ezra Prentice Public Housing Complex. All diesel trucks passing through the city are routed through B.B. White's neighborhood. And Global Companies, an oil and gas company, has its crude oil terminal located just yards from that same housing complex. No one barbecues outside in the summer, B.B. White says, because of the sour smell that comes off the storage tanks. The engines in the oil terminal are permitted to run all night. The air pollution is significantly worse in this neighborhood than in other parts of Albany. The residents are left breathing carcinogens. Not surprisingly, asthma and emphysema rates in this neighborhood are unusually high. Regardless, Global Companies is looking to expand its operations in Albany's South End. I used to live in Albany, New York, 3 miles away from the Ezra Prentice community, as it turns out. I lived on a street lined with grand, towering trees and impressive brick houses, well insulated from the street noise, comfortable in every season. Despite our proximity, I never met B.B. White or his little boy. I read about them in a newspaper after the legal nonprofit Earth Justice filed a lawsuit against Global Companies, charging them for the effect their operations have on the health and quality of the life of the families living nearby. It's not that the Ezra Prentice housing complex was out of sight exactly. I drove by that part of Albany fairly regularly. But B.B. White's reality was carefully sectioned off from my own. Our lives didn't easily overlap. His grocery store wasn't my grocery store. His post office wasn't my post office. Even if we heated our homes in the same way, relied on the same concoction of benzene and ethanol to travel from point A to point B, him on a bus, me in a car. The trucks and trains that so disrupt the lives of this father and son largely transport what's needed to make those of us living in comfort more comfortable. While B.B. White and his son live in the place that houses the residue of our daily lives, hiding the sour-smelling consequences outside of my daily awareness. Author Apricot Irving writes, "A crisis measures how we respond to those around us, how connected we are, what we do when we're afraid." And here we are in the teeth of a mounting climate crisis, a crisis that lays our corrupt social infrastructure bare. Every power outage, every flood reveals more and more starkly the intimate details of inequality. Yet it has been powerful seeing so many teenagers out in the streets, skipping school, speaking from public platforms with clear urgency about climate change and the strain on the web of life. I'm sure you've seen some of the signs these young people have been carrying at protests around the world. Some say things like, "Climate is changing, why aren't we?" Others are more blunt, "Our house is on fire." While others read, "I'll take my exams when you take action," or "If you don't act like adults, we will." I've heard young people being interviewed on radio or TV, breaking down in tears, their voices shaking with frustration, so heartbroken that we, the adults in charge, seem to not be listening. When they look at us, it seems they see an entrenched sense of futility. People with power doing too little, doing our best to hunker down into life as usual, convincing ourselves that we can still look the other way and pretend it's not happening. When these young leaders look at us, they see apathy, and I bristle at that thought. So when I hear the word apathy, I think of someone who doesn't care, an indifferent person, passions dulled to a halt, passive, lethargic. Apathy is a gray, dilapidated couch, one where the cushions take on a quality that is more like quicksand than cotton, so that even though you aren't that comfortable, it's extremely difficult to get up once you've sat down. By that definition, I don't think of us as apathetic. German liberation theologian Dorothy Zola has written at length about apathy. Not so much individual indifference, but collective apathy, social apathy. Zola was intent on better understanding why horrible things take place in societies full of troubled yet compliant witnesses. Through her work, Zola discovered that what she found to be a hidden twist in the experience of apathy. She writes, "Apathia is a Greek word that literally means non-suffering, freedom from suffering, a creature's inability to suffer. She writes, apathy is understood as a social condition in which we are so dominated by the goal of avoiding suffering that it becomes a goal to avoid human relationships and contacts altogether. She continues, and then an inability to perceive suffering develops. Not only one's own, but especially the suffering of others. The consequence of this suffering-free state of well-being, she says, is that people's lives become frozen solid. Nothing threatens any longer, nothing grows any longer with the characteristic pains that all growth involves. Nothing changes. Zola's hidden twist to apathy is that apathy reveals how staggeringly much we do, in fact, care. How deeply we long to relate to one another, how inherently wired we are for connection and relationship. But because caring involves pain and relationships involve struggle, we develop layers of apathy around our hearts to protect us. And the consequence, of course, is that the more sturdy and robust our layers of protection become, the better we are at shutting out pain, the less we experience compassion and reverence for life. Apathy is a way of self-medicating our empathy, a way of numbing the inner resources that would lead us to a change in consciousness, a strengthening of commitment. I assure you that as I spent years driving by the noxious air pollution in B.B. White's neighborhood in Albany, with my car windows firmly rolled up, it was not that I didn't care about B.B. White's little boy, not that I didn't think they both deserve a better quality of life, basic safety, a good night's sleep, healthy lungs, and a life-giving breeze through the window every now and then. In the course of things, I insulated my existence from theirs. It would have changed the landscape of my everyday life to feel what they felt. It would have uprooted so much of what I take for granted, starkly revealing the fault lines of inequality that run beneath my ease of life. In the story we heard earlier, based on a Hindu myth, 4 pilgrims go to visit a sage, a priest, a philosopher, a merchant, and a poet. Each pilgrim immersed one way or another in the callous injustices of daily living. And the sage tells them of how the gods are sickened by the way we human beings misuse our power for greed instead of compassion. And when the gods wonder where to hide this source of power, this divine spark, they debate hiding it in the deepest sea, on the highest mountain, the dark side of the moon. But in the end, they decide that human ingenuity seemingly uncovers any and all wonderful and dangerous things. And so the gods decide to hide the divine spark where we will never look for it, deep inside of us. We may wonder how on earth something as vital and brilliant as the divine spark, something as electric and life-giving, could stay hidden in our own psyches generation after generation. But perhaps it isn't all that surprising. After all, being in touch with the divine spark isn't all enlightenment and inspiration, joy and peace, oneness with beauty. Finding that divine spark within us is like unwrapping layers of insulation from around our hearts, leaving ourselves vulnerable to all we cannot control. Revealing that divine spark means exposing the nerve endings of our compassion. It means knowing the suffering of others as our own. It means being fully immersed in our own humanness. So long as the divine spark, animator of compassion and reverence for life, stays hidden, there will be no shift in our consciousness, no change in the way we live our lives. As Dorothy Zola says, the consequence of insulating ourselves from suffering is that our lives become frozen solid. Nothing grows any longer with the characteristic pains that all growth involves. Nothing changes. As the pilgrims listen to the sage's story, it is only the poet who weeps unconsolably as he hears about the callous misuse of power in our world. Only the poet who allows a gritty, foul-smelling reality to seep in. It's only the poet who feels intimately the poisoning of life for the profit of a few. And it's only the poet in his sorrow who reveals his heart in all its fullness and commits himself to transforming the world. No doubt we will continue to struggle collectively for the courage to care enough about one another and the earth, the courage to profoundly shift our way of life. We struggle because the four pilgrims in the story live inside each of us. Like the priest, we often look elsewhere outside of our own capacities for deliverance. Like the philosopher, we can ponder forever theories of social change, building castles of peace and justice in our mind without the sweat of mixing mortar or laying bricks. Like the merchant, each of us knows how to jealously guard our own interests while still craving more. And like the poet, each of us can take up the hammer, the power to give new shape to the world with words of wisdom and beauty, with songs of protest, with tears that melt away our resistance to reality and bind us more strongly together across viewpoint and way of life. When the temptation of apathy is strongest, when we feel small and anxious, no match for the coming changes in ocean currents, no match for the grip oil has on our lives or the suffering of the most vulnerable among us. Even then, the poet calls to us from within to take into our hands what we can control, which is how compassionately and reverently human we choose to be.
the machine. They say he had arms like oak trees, and when he swung his hammer, the earth shook and lightning flashed. When the machine showed up at camp one day, he knew he was in trouble. For any machine that could work faster than a man would put him and hundreds others like him out of work. And so, ain't no machine can hammer steel like a man, said John Henry. You're on, said the machine. They went at it, toe to toe, for a whole mile straight up the mountain. John Henry on one side, the machine on the other, to see who was faster, man or machine. And in the end, John Henry beat the machine by one stroke of his hammer. The first in American history to challenge the machine and win. But he worked so hard, his heart gave out. And he laid down his hammer and he died. They say in death, his spirit flew skyward like 1,000 silver birds. One of those silver birds came to rest in the heart of a young black boy from Atlanta. Later, he became a king and led his people out of bondage. Other silver birds rested in the others and in my family as well, and I'll bet some of you too, in your families. Like John Henry, I became a steel-driving man, equally fated perhaps to fall one day, hammer in hand, fighting the machine to the end. A good death, purposeful life, for what more could one ask? But now the machine is swelled in power and reach. It straddles the world, a groaning, twisting, monstrous thing that devours entire ecosystems. And in its wake, a biosphere tumbles into ruin. 1 million species vanish forever in the night of time. 100 million refugees scramble for higher ground and cooler climes. A democracy hangs by a thread. You know what I mean. We face the same existential dilemma that John Henry faced. What to do about this infernal machine? Only now the stakes are much, much higher. Nothing less than the soul of the world. We must do something. You must do something. Do something. Anything. Even a small thing is better than nothing. We must hammer the machine before it hammers us. Apathy is not an option. It never was.
Let's pray together. These are the words of Kelly Weissman Jackson. Dear great lathe of heaven, O foundry of souls, you churning, burning cosmos, which was wrought me on the infinite loom of your celestial body. Spinning stars and indifferent stones, hear my prayer. Do not curse me to perish with all my dreams fulfilled. Do not afflict me with a vision so narrow and a heart so small that all my greatest hopes could be accomplished within a single lifetime. Rather, bless me with an unquiet spirit. Anoint me with impertinent oils. Grant me dreams so great and numerous that I might spend the fullness of my days to realize them and have ample remaining to leave to my inheritors. Holy gyre that bore me and must one day take me home, allow me the mercy to depart this life with unfinished business. Let's hold silence together. Amen. Now we turn to our life together as a congregation, and in a moment I'll highlight a few of the upcoming opportunities for engagement here. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce Jim Van Fleet, who is going to come forward to say a few words on behalf of our stewardship team.
Here is the stewardship word. I'm going to give it to you. Yes!
Yes!
All right, I don't have to tell you what to do. Give it back. Give it to me again.
Yes!
All right, keep them coming. Yes! 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 All right. Are we going to transform this world with our care?
Yes!
Are we going to make a change?
Yes!
Are we going to go to the stewardship table and increase our pledge by 8% to fully fund all our programs and positions?
Yes!
Great job, everybody. May it be so.
Thank you, Jim. Following the service, we hope that you will indeed find your way into Freeman Hall. The middle schoolers are putting on a fundraiser brunch to raise money for their high school elders so that they can take a trip to Boston as part of the Coming of Age program. If you signed up or you're still hoping to sign up, we hope you can join us in the Bernstein Room at 1 p.m. for a workshop entitled, Can Happiness Save Us? And finally, we ask that you join us this Wednesday at 7 p.m. for a dessert party in Freeman Hall. This is part of the On the Table program, which seeks to bring together people from all over the city to have meaningful conversation. In a moment when the offering baskets are being passed and music is being played, all are welcome, member and visitor alike, to come forward to light a candle, honoring whatever joy, sorrow, or remembrance you carry with you today. This morning, we are sending love to the family of Kathy Allen and Beth Mousset as they mourn the death of Kathy's mother and Beth's grandmother. Whatever joy or sorrow is in your heart, may you feel held by this community.
It occurs to me that we live in interesting times. I think that what's happening now is we are watching the birth of a new world, a new civilization, a post-fossil fuel civilization. And like any birth, it is painful and difficult. And sometimes the contractions push things forward, and sometimes they pull this new form, this new world back into the womb of time. There is some reassurance in the fact that the young people are out on the streets all over the world trying to get this new world into being. And this last climate change protest down in uptown Charlotte, I was reminded of some of the words of William Blake. And I changed the words just a little bit. I added 2 letters, that's it, just 2 letters. But it does change things a bit, and I'm sorry, Mr. Blake, had to be done. Now, like a mighty wind, they raise to heaven the voice of song, or like harmonious thunderings, the seats of heaven among. Beneath them sit the aged men, unwise guardians of the poor. Then cherish pity, lest you drive an angel from your door. We will now give and receive the offering. Please join me in an affirmation of our faith, rising in body or spirit or both or neither. Hope longs.
It longs for good to be affirmed, for justice and love to prevail, for suffering to be alleviated, and for life to flourish in peace. Hope acts. It acts to bless, to protest, and to repair.
These are the words of the Sufi poet Rumi. We have fallen into the place where everything is music. The strumming and the flute notes rise into the atmosphere. And even if the whole world's harp should burn up, there will still be hidden instruments playing. So the candle flickers and goes out. We have a piece of flint and a spark. Please be seated.